How are you, Nancy? It was you, I believe, who wanted me to send the, okay, we are live on YouTube. And it was you, I
Yes.
believe, that wanted me to send the article again, right?
No, I don't know that I asked you to.
Okay, somebody did, and I resent it. Um, okay, um, well, it's almost 8 o'clock in the East, and uh, do we know where our children are? Well, I know where one of my grandchildren is. I have a new granddaughter since last we spoke, and her name is Saoirse, which is Saoirse, like Saoirse Ronan, the lead in Little Women.
She's going to be spelling that a lot for people.
I think so, yeah.
It's a beautiful name, though.
Yeah, her middle name is Marion, which was my grandmother's given name, and we grandchildren of that grandmother referred to her as Marnie. So I'm considering referring to my granddaughter as Marnie, but I don't know if my son-in-law will be appreciative if I do that. But anyway. um, So we're here for a continuation of this a discussion of this essay on Jung the Craftsman. And the point I was trying to make, I hope I made it, and I think you probably agree with me. Oops, Deborah is trying to get on and can't. So let me see if I can get her on. There she is, I hope. Promote to panelist. Okay, so Deborah, you're on, but you're currently muted. Ah, there you go. Now you've unmuted. Uh, as I was saying, last
Hi,
week
Deborah.
we were talking about Jung the craftsman and doing things with your hands and writing and that sort of thing. And there are a couple of pieces of poetry that I wanted to mention. There's a word that's used in this essay, which is syncretic. And syncretic means uh, bringing things together from different cultural traditions and so on. And one of the things that poetry does is it allows you through metaphor, through uh, different images to pull various things together in a unique way for you, I believe. And so I want to read a couple of poems here that I have particularly uh, appreciated, and then we can, as people join, we can uh, go on to other issues. But um, one of my favorite parts of a poem, I don't think this is certainly not the whole thing, but Mary Oliver wrote a poem called Wild Geese. And there's particular interesting quatrain here. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And I think that that's particularly poignant. And then a longtime friend of mine on Facebook, who I've never met, but who I've communicated with for a decade or so, um, wrote a poem, and her name, it's a very inflammatory name. Her name is Melissa Laflamme. Flamme, Melissa LaFlamme. And, but she wrote a poem called Be Art Now. And here's what she says. Those brilliant shards of the sharply reasoned, respectable, socially acceptable, good girl, good boy, pieces of your world. Go ahead, scatter them while you can, before they harden into a mosaic you think you have to call your life, before their cutting edges become too comfortable, too safe, too gray and small, too tightly bound in a modern, exacting, soul extracting realism in a form not of your own making. You know what I mean. Shake loose while you can. It's all right. We are here, walking on crystal on a path, more like an edge, holy, 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 and then holy, Wholly. So more like an edge, holy, holy, unknown till now. Unfasten, be what allures you, moistens your waiting mouth, lights your wet, wondering eyes. Become the musk and the fur that makes your smart girl, smart boy quiver with the vulnerability that is your birthright to embody. The bad boy beauty at the fringes of imagination, the bad girl whisper in the landscape of your sweaty dream. The surreal door of your soul's authentic workshop opens. When you unfasten those heavy culture-bound hinges they welded to your heart. Flung open now, ready to melt, it is love that you craft with fire and blood of the earth. Life that is artistry, your one true, freaky, sacred way. Beyond that door on holy ground, you are welcome. The slow approach to your artisanal edge to deliver the cargo you came to bring is what will lick you alive now. This sacred edge is your luminous custard-colored stomping ground. This edge beckons one rare move. Simple as it is, it asks everything of you. If you would follow now the invisible bend on that darkly scented trail, if you would only be art now. Okay, so that's by Melissa LaFlamme, and it's from her book entitled What You Are For, Inciting a Revolution in Your Soul. And it was written in 2015. So I just thought that was a terrific example of a poem that's about the soul and getting things moving in your life. Comments?
Yeah, I like that incite a revolution in your soul. So do that first before you try to incite a revolution somewhere else.
Yeah. Let's see, I have Tim here with us now too. I hope. Yes, there he comes. Welcome, Tim. You just missed the Be Art Now poem from Melissa LaFlamme. I'll see if I can find a typed version of it. I guess I have a typed version of it here.
Be Art Now, is that the Berkeley conference?
No, it's the name of a poem by a woman I know. I think she might live in Berkeley, actually, or somewhere out in that general neck of the woods. Her name is Melissa LaFlamme. Have you ever heard of her?
No, but I did a presentation for the Be Art Now conference in Berkeley about 3 or 4 years ago.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's right, because I remember seeing your video about that. And so this may be connected to that. I think you're a member of my private group on Facebook called It's called something like the rabbi, the Marine, and so go into a bar, right? It's a play on a joke, but
that sounds familiar.
yeah. Well, Melissa, I believe, is a member of that group. But anyway, she's on Facebook. If you look up her page on Facebook, you'll probably find a lot of very good stuff. So it's Melissa Laflamme, Flamme. And so, hi, Art, good to see you tonight. Adam says, pardon my ignorance, but how does one join the reading group? I seem to recall that Dropbox plays a part in the process. Okay, so Adam, the answer to your question is you've already joined the reading group, because here you are, and we're in our 157th session since June 1st of 2016. And Miles has something going here.
Did he mean the advanced reading group rather than the...
I don't know. Adam, tell me if you mean the advanced reading group. That's a good question. And let's see if I can promote.
Skip, Miles is trying to get in.
I'm letting him in right now. There he is. Okay. So Adam, to be a part of our regular reading group, it's every Monday night at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And in order to get access to our Dropbox, which contains many treasures, you need to send an email to skip.conover@gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat on YouTube. And then for the advanced reading group, same process, you write to me. We hold those sessions on Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m. And that's 1:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Okay, so, and okay, so Adam says yes, the advanced reading group. So write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I'll get that organized for you. And so the next session will be this Wednesday at 1:30, and all of our previous sessions, which is at this point a couple of hundred, or not a couple of hundred, about 100, I guess, are still there on the Dropbox, but they are not on YouTube. The advanced reading group is not. Okay, so we are talking about an essay that is in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And this is volume 3 of the book. And this is an essay by Dr. Linda Carter. And what she has been writing about is Jung's activities as an artist and craftsman. Mainly he regarded it as a craft, but I think many of us think that a lot of his work is very artistic. But anyway, there's a lot of his art in the Red Book, and in this book, The Art of C.G. Jung, that you see over my right shoulder here. And so did anybody have any comments that they wanted to add before I go on here?
Well, Skip, I can say a little bit since I'm kind of the new member of this wonderful association here.
Right.
By reading the essay and also reading quite a bit of MDR this week, I was just shocked and amazed at things that Jung went through that I went through as a child, including petit mal seizures up until the age of 7.
Mm-hmm.
And well, when we're talking about the intuition and spiritualism and all that, I was a very neglected child as was Jung. And to the point where when I would have these, and I didn't know what they were, these episodes, you couldn't make any noise at night. You couldn't wake up the baby because there was always a baby in the house, and I was the middle child. But the interesting thing about it, as I would have these, it was like bolts of lightning and electricity flying around me and crushing me, and then like big, almost like tumbleweeds crushing me. And I said they stopped miraculously, thank goodness, at the age of 7. But I would get very upset over these, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, and there'd be a woman sitting beside my bed, and she would reach over and she would strike my, pet my hair, which at that point was red and down to my knees almost. And she would sit there and she would pat my head, and she would tell me everything was going to be okay. And anyway, she told me she was grandma, and my grandma did not live with us. And so years later, I had not told anyone about this except my one brother. Years later, we tore down the furnace system in the basement when we went in. It was a very old house, pre-Civil War, log cabin that had been restored. And so when they tore down the vent in front of the vent that went to my room, it had written in big letters across the vent, grandma's room. So whoever this grandma was, she came and cared for me. So I wanted to share that tonight.
Well, that's interesting.
I've always said I want to write a short story on this, and that's what I do. Maybe I could write a whole novel on it about this house, because it was an amazing house. But I really can relate to what I was reading in MDR. And then when I read this essay, which was just today, it drew me in even more. And I especially want to thank Nancy too for telling me how beautifully MDR was written, how luscious the prose is, because Nancy remarked on that, and I did quite a big section on it this week, and it has helped me immensely. So
terrific. I'm glad to hear that. It always helps me, actually.
It was amazing, the things that he went through that I could relate to. And but that's families. I think we all have a spattering of it. So, well,
I think a lot of people have such experiences, and they rate them out of themselves somehow, and they try to ignore them, and then gradually they go away, at least.
They don't.
or not. And actually, if you're lucky, they don't go away, because if they don't go away and you can learn to appreciate them, then you can control the situation, and get creative ideas out of it, such as you're discussing here.
Right. Writing the story, yes.
Yeah, writing
a
story.
I'll just add, for the listening public who might not be aware of the abbreviation used, MDR, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And it was written, editor is who again, Skip?
Aniella Jaffe. Aniella Jaffe, but she wrote it, with the exception of 3 chapters that were written specifically by Dr. Jung. She wrote it based on what she called the protocols, which were actually her shorthand notes from conversations that she had with Dr. Jung early in the last 5 years of his life, such that she was able to get it together into a book before he died. And he actually saw it before he died, or he saw most of the material. I think he died before it was actually published, but and it's sometimes criticized, but we are going to go into it in coming weeks. This is the book. This is what it looks like in Barnes & Noble, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And it's kind of the biography of Dr. Jung's psychological development, his own, based on his personal experiences, based on his 60 years as a psychiatrist, a practicing psychiatrist, So it has a lot of incredible insights into it, even though it's not officially part of his collected works. He didn't want it part of his collected works because it did not have the rigorous, it didn't have the rigorous footnotes that he normally had in his books. And it really wasn't making a particular point, I don't think, about his way of thinking about the world. I mean, it was just his reflections of things that stimulated him along the path. And as we study Dr. Jung's work, and then keep going back to books like Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and Man and His Symbols, we can see very often where he was getting these things and why they're relevant.
I'd like to just point out something. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I just wanted to say some of the interesting passages are his travels and meeting with tribal peoples in Africa and in the Southwest,
right?
The Pueblo Indians.
Yes, he was very interested in primitive psychology, which is what he was looking into in those places, because he was trying to understand the development of the human psyche going back, thousands of years, really. And so by going to these tribal groups, you really get back to where people were in a very rudimentary stage of development that haven't suffered epistemological criticism, which is civilization telling you shouldn't be thinking that.
What I'd like to just add into the conversation, there's an interesting confluence here in that today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day down in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm up in Canada. It's not an official celebration here, but we are always very aware of it. And it's also almost to the day in 1961 that President Dwight D. Eisenhower delivered his very powerful farewell address, which was a warning. Martin Luther King, we could bring up all kinds of warnings about the perilous state of our civilization. Mm-hmm. And it's also the year that Carl Jung died, 1961. And Memories, Dreams, and Reflections really is actually, would you say also in a sense a warning, contains warnings about civilization, future?
Well, Dr. Jung's, his entire work contains warnings, that's for sure. Because, he was dealing with the human psyche, and, he observed that during his lifetime, so it's a little longer now, but he observed during his lifetime that we'd only just really discovered the psyche and talking about psychology per se about 100 years before Dr. Jung died. So, it was in the late 19th century that people started to really think about the psyche and talk about it and what it meant. And so now we're knowing more, but we still need to know much more and learn how to apply that to our current affairs, obviously, because.
And the words of President Dwight D. Eisenhower in this farewell speech of, if it wasn't, because he was saying farewell because the president is always elected around this weekend, correct?
Well, no,
takes office. Not elected. He takes office.
Right. So in 1961, he would have been leaving the office. Yes.
So right on, basically around this day, very close to it, if not on this day, and I don't know that there's ever been a president that laid out such a stark warning. He said, he said, people of, the United States, you have to be conscious of the military industrial complex, and we require an alert, knowledgeable citizenry.
Absolutely. And of course, the terrible things that he predicted are exactly what has happened, where right after that is when we got into the Vietnam War in earnest and sacrificed 58,000 of our generation to the gods of war without any clear understanding of what we were doing. I mean, maybe the powers that be knew, but I'm not sure they did. There's 2020 hindsight, which says that this was a hot battle of the Cold War, and it intentionally caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, nobody ever said that to me in my whole Marine Corps career, not when I was in Vietnam or for the next 20 years after that. I never heard any such thing. That's only revisionist history that came out after Ronald Reagan was in office for a few years. And, the idea that we were attacking the Russians, the Russians weren't any part of the Vietnam War as far as I could see. But it did turn out, with 2020 hindsight, we know that because we built up a 600 ship Navy at that time, and because we built the Marine Corps to twice its current size, and we built the U.S. military to the point where we had 2 million combat veterans in our generation. So this is a generation after World War II. We had 2 million combat veterans that we could put into a war. So that scared the bejesus out of the Soviets, and they spent a lot of money on armaments that basically ran them out of money, is what it ultimately ended up doing. But I don't think anybody was consciously doing that, even McNamara and those guys. I never heard that before the late 80s. Any comments on that, Jerome? You have any thought about that?
Well, Eisenhower, I think, is a very wise person, and he was very intelligent, and he was
Sure.
a master planner, strategist, and I did a research paper on him when I was in school, and he was just incredible in terms of his wisdom, and I think we ought to listen, like Miles said, listen to that wisdom today. It applies today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel, because what he said applies today. And
right.
as far as building up a warrior force, generals need to have something to do. So we need to think about, let's make sure they're not just doing it because they want to play warrior. So.
Okay, so Saul Serpentine here says, let's talk about how Carl Jung literally thought that Hitler was possessed by the Norse god Odin. Okay, that is not the topic for discussion tonight. And if you want to find an article on that, the way he spelled it in his Germanic way was W-O-T-A-N, Wotan, and it's in volume 10 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and you can read his article on that. It wasn't only Hitler that was possessed by Odin, it was also the whole German nation. It was a psychic epidemic, but I'm not going to go into that tonight because it's not tonight's topic. And Namji says, hi Skip, does introvert person really often overthink certain things happens around him? Yeah, I guess it depends on the person. And Nicholas Chan says, I thought it was Wotan, W-O-T-A-N. Well, Wotan and Odin, in my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Jerome, and Tim,
Oh, that's right. It's
Odin.
yeah, Wotan is the one that was an ancient god or entity that they responded to, and
Right.
it attacked people's subconscious, and they didn't realize it because it's unconscious.
Right.
They
Precisely.
were. It came out, and then they were driven to this,
Right.
and that's what's scary about that is we need to be very aware of this today.
Yeah, absolutely. Miles, are you able to put that link in? Miles has found the link to the Eisenhower speech, but I guess I can put it into the YouTube chat if you can't.
Yeah, he can't do the links.
All right. Let me do that quickly. I will.
Sometimes you can put links in. It depends, I think, on how the settings are by the person in charge of YouTube.
Okay, well, I can do it, certainly. Okay, so I did it.
Skip's in charge.
For now. Okay, I want to go back to this article, though, Jung the Craftsman. And on page 234, I want to talk about one important sentence here. She says, he was crafting and being crafted by his own soul. And so I wonder if any of you want to speak to what that really means.
Well, I know when I have a strong emotion and I sit down and draw a picture of what comes to mind as I'm with that emotion and see it in front of me, I learn something about myself. So it's like the unconscious is speaking through me to me, and I'm changed.
Right, because you're getting connections in your psyche and your unconscious that you weren't aware of before, I think.
That's it.
Tim, you want to hit that one? He was crafting and being crafted by his own soul.
I guess not. It's absolutely true. I don't know what to say about that, though.
Okay. That's Tim's whole life. So asking me, asking Tim to comment on it is like asking him to spend the next year talking about it.
Well, what he's really saying is that you follow the affect, like Nancy says. She has an affect, and you follow that affect. This whole article is
when we say affect, we mean emotion. Okay.
Well, it can be a visceral feeling. It can be. It doesn't have to be an emotion in particular. It can just be a mood. I mean, we confuse emotions with feelings in terms of moods, and they're just different areas. And so the affect comes up, and if you follow it, is what this article is about. And it can guide you if you follow it. If you ignore it, then you haven't done a thing.
Well, and also it's everything that Dr. Jung's work was about, because Dr. Jung's work was about the eros, not the logos. The logos is words and rationalism, and there's really nothing in Dr. Jung's work that's aimed at rationalism, because the rationalism of the word or whatever it is really only the skeleton of life, but it's not the flesh and blood of it. Let's see. Lucifella says, just found this channel a few days ago looking into the Red Book and recovered my copy of MDR from my parents last week. You guys are going to be reading it. Actually, yeah, we're not going to read it online, because there's an excellent reading of Memories, Dreams, Reflections on audible.com. I urge you to buy that one and listen to that. It's by Robert Bethune, and it's an excellent reading. So I urge you to go look for that on audible.com. So one of the things that is referred to here is that Dr. Jung was looking at specific modes of thinking about things to use them as syncretic vehicles for manifesting the dissociated parts of himself. Now, keep in mind that when we're born, we don't know anything. We're wild animals. Human beings, like any other creature, is a wild animal when we're born. And so we have all kinds of things going on in our psyche, and we gradually have to put them together into something that is useful to us. Obviously, the first thing we find to put together that's useful to us is a nipple. That allows us to eat. But comfort follows right after that. And so we're constantly trying to put all kinds of ideas, crazy things that are going on in our psyche together so that we can make sense of them. And then for the first 20 to 25 years of our life, we're really trying to understand the civilization that we're born into in a way that can make sense. So in a sense, we need logos during that period because we need to know what the rules are. Then once we know what the rules are, then we can start breaking them as what's her name? Mary Oliver suggests. You don't have to be good. But what the word that caught my attention this evening when I was looking at this was the word syncretic, which I said, oh my goodness, I don't really know what that word means. And what it means is a methodology by which you put different cultural ideas together and different things from different periods together. So Dr. Jung was putting things together from the Middle Ages, from Asia, and putting them together with European, German style culture of the early 20th century. And so that's what he was about. But all of us have to do that. And so this process of crafting is a way to help you find out what it is in your psyche that you need to connect up with the things in your world. And so last week I was showing the demonstration of my early attempts at calligraphy, where basically what I'm doing is I'm picking out a Jungian quote which speaks to me at a given time, and then I'm trying to put imagery around it and figure out how to present it in a way that can be meaningful not only to me but to others. And so the one that I've been working on is my friends, it's a good thing to nourish the soul, because if you don't, you'll breed dragons and devils in your heart. And so I'm trying to express that in imagery. But the idea is that if you can't connect with your soul, with the basis of your being, let's say, then you will have a kind of a nihilistic life. It's hard to get flesh and blood into that. If you say, okay, I'm going to do everything according to the rigid rules, then you might be a good Marine, but I'm not sure that you would have a very fulfilling overall life. I mean, even a Marine needs to have a wife and child and children and so on to have something to care about in life. Otherwise, why care? So comments on that?
I'd like to show my own little red book for people who want to do something simple and are not artists. So I got this sketchbook at Walmart, and I ran this little thing through, and it says The Red Book, Dreams, Visions, Inspirations by Nancy Pfaff, Volume 1. And then what I do is I take some time to draw the lines on the pad itself. And while I'm drawing just the lines, I'm letting the dream come up further for me. So the dream is becoming closer and closer to the surface. And then I write down the dream and I write some associations. And in this particular dream, I'm sleeping in the back of a car and a thief comes and steals my purse. And that was the outstanding image from the dream. So I always leave a little space to do a bit of a cartoon. And so that's just an easy way to do it. And then I was just looking at this today, and one of the things that came up about the time I did this, we were reading Jung's Mysterium Conjunctionis, pages 167 and 168. And it says, the thief in our text is armed with all evil, but in reality, it is merely the ego with its shadow. So that synchronicity, you know, came in as part of this dream work.
So the shadow was the thief?
The ego with its shadow. So when the ego is, you know, has shadow elements going on, it steals from us our authenticity and our wholeness.
Yes. Right.
Thanks for showing us that, Nancy. I'm always really intrigued to see how people unfold their ideas like that. And I think it's just so cool that you add drawings of your dreams. That's really great.
And
thank you.
Yeah, and
well, I could also mention that some people are visual and some people are feeling types and kinesthetic, and it's like you might have to do something with sculpture or wood, but you should know, and some are auditory types, they call them. In other words, music, hearing, and so forth. So you should figure out what your strength is in terms of type and use that to call this forward, because that's your natural way of looking at the world. So.
Precisely. Dr. Jung did it in many different ways. He did a lot of writing, of course, but he also did these paintings, and he was a stonemason, and he literally built a house in Bollingen. And one interesting thing about the house that he built at Bollingen was, which I didn't discover probably until 5 or 10 years after I heard about Bollingen, was the fact that he did not have it plumbed or electricity in it. He said if a medieval man came into his house, the only modern thing he would find in it was the matches. And the reason for that was that he wanted to live like a medieval man, to try to give the imagery that was in his psyche from that time an opportunity to come forward in an authentic way. That's why he did it. But here's a quote that he has about building the house. In building the tower, which is Bollingen, he felt that he quote, had to achieve a kind of representation in stone of my innermost thoughts and knowledge I had acquired, or to put it another way, I had to make a confession of faith in stone. That was the beginning of the tower, the house which I built for myself at Bollingen. So he was saying, you know, I'm doing this creative act and this is for me. I mean, I think a lot of people that knew him at the time probably had no clue what he was up to. And they probably went out and visited it and found it not plumbed and without electricity, and didn't find that terribly attractive. I mean, I know in 1956, my father took me back to our family farm for the first time when I was 10 years old, and it was not plumbed and it had no electricity. And we literally were using oil lamps in the house. And then after that, my grandfather did put in a couple of bathrooms and electricity in the house, but it was very, very primitive, and at that time when I was 10 years old. So let's see here. So the fire says the creator is influenced by his creation. Yes, agree. Renee says the unconscious is the mother of us all. Absolutely. The collective unconscious is the dark universe within us, certainly, and well, and within our societies. Renee goes on, matter is limited. Matter is limited. It is antimatter, the invisible spirit, which is ultimately viable and unending. Not sure about that one because don't matter and antimatter cancel one another out. I'm not sure about that. Does anybody have any scientific thought on that? I mean, one issue is there's not perfect, you know, with all these opposites in our psyche, there's a not perfect matching up of a pair of opposites. For example, if there's matter there might not be perfect antimatter. Or if you're thinking masculine and feminine, well, it could, you know, it could be, you could be thinking God and the devil is another pair of opposites, but they're all different, and so they don't add up perfectly and cancel each other out. They're actually the source of psychic energy because of the dualities. So for anyone that's just listening to this for the first time, I would at this point urge you to take a look at a book called Psychic Energy, Its Sources and Transformation by Esther Harding, which she was a first generation disciple of Dr. Jung's, and also Erich Neumann's book, The Origins and History of Consciousness. So by Erich Neumann, it's pronounced Neumann, but spelled Newman, Neumann. Info says, I think that understanding religion psychologically is not sufficient enough to live a meaningful life. I think there needs to be more to it. I'm just not sure what. What are your thoughts? Okay, well, you're quite right, Info, because understanding it psychologically is what Jordan Peterson has been trying to do with his biblical series, where he's gone back and taken the early stories of the Bible and described them from a psychological point of view. But basically, he's building his approach based on words. And Dr. Jung's point was that you have to have experience. You're not going to understand anything in religion or any other major topic unless you have experience of a full experience. So it's like you know, if you tell a child the stove is hot, they don't know what that is until they've touched the stove. If you tell a child that there's a God, they're not going to know what that is until they've experienced it. Then they know. And so, you know, this is the trick question that Dr. Jung was asked. You can look it up on YouTube because it's a very popular video where Dr. Jung is asked, do you believe in God? And he says, I have no need to believe because I know. And what he meant was that he knew God as an experience. Okay, he's not saying that there's a Papa God like is sold to you in Sunday school, and you know, he's saying you have to understand that God is within you and is partially in you, but you're not going to know that until you experience it. Once you experience it, then you know.
Yeah, I think that's the important part is the experience, because info says understanding religion psychologically is not sufficient. Well, you can understand psychologically the different points and key points of psychology, but unless you're experienced it and lived it, it's a different matter altogether, you know?
Right.
So,
and Malcolm Gladwell's book about becoming a master of something, I don't recall which book it is, what the name of it is, but it's a book in which he says in order to master anything, you have to put 10,000 hours into it, then you know. And so the same is true of keyboarding on your computer, where all of us that are involved in this, whether in the webinar or on YouTube, we all keyboard now. Okay, most of us touch type. So somehow we learned how to touch type. And as long as you have to think where the letters are, you can't type. It's only when you can forget that. It's only when you can forget where the letters are, then you can touch type. So, you know, I go through weeks at a time on, you know, working at my computer, and I never think about where the A is on the keyboard, right? And I haven't thought about that since I was a freshman in college or a senior in high school. And so that's knowing, that's not believing. I mean, if you believe, then you maybe believe that if you hit this key, it's going to type that A or whatever it is, but knowing is something different. It's and yeah, I mentioned the bicycle last week, where as long as you have to think about how to steer and balance and pedal, you can't ride a bicycle. But as soon as you forget those things, then you can ride a bicycle. And so it's exactly like that. Once you experience it, then you know. And so the fire says gnosis is logos, right? Experience is something else. I don't think that that's what gnosis is. I do not claim to be an expert on gnosis, and Jung gets accused of being a Gnostic often, and I don't think that he's really a Gnostic in the 4th century sense. I think that the key thing that he was getting at was the experience of God, and the fact that you have to experience God in order to understand God, and the church always wants to just tell you what God is. They don't want to let you experience it and know what they know, if they know it, which is a question, because well, I don't know.
I'd just like to mention how I got started in religion as an adult.
Yeah.
I was listening to a song by Peggy Lee a long time ago called "Is This All There Is?"
Mhm.
I was feeling on the inside, there's got to be more to life than this. And a friend visited me and she felt I was depressed, and she said, you should go to church. And I thought, well, that'd be cheap enough anyway. So
Mhm.
out the back door of my house, I could hear the organist practicing the chimes for the next Sunday service. And I thought, well, I'm going to look and see where those chimes are coming from. And I went to that particular church, which was a Congregational Presbyterian Combination Church at the time, and just sat in the back row and listened. And gradually something began to move within me, and I joined some of the groups within the church to get to know people. And then we had a pastor come who really knew about the experience of God and he preached out of that experience of God, and you could feel it. You could feel the difference. It wasn't someone just teaching from a book or writing a good speech. This was someone where his words and his life brought forth spirit. And I began to experience it. What it seemed like to me was Jesus was following me around like a ghost.
Which is exactly what he was doing.
And so I asked a friend of mine, I said, have you ever felt like Jesus is right there? And she said, oh, yes. She says, go talk to the pastor. He'll help you out. And then it went on from there. But what I realized was that, you know, God is seeking us even more than we're seeking God. But the longings that we have for meaning and the longings we have that our life makes sense, that there's more to life than just eating and working and having a family and growing old and dying. There's more to it than that. There's a beautiful sacredness. There's a fire that we can get in touch with that makes life amazing and holds us through the most difficult times, strengthen us through the most difficult times in our life. Right. So letting God, in a sense, guide and draw. All we need to pay attention to, in a way, is our longing for meaning.
Right. Okay, one of the ways that the church prevented that in early church was, I was reading today in the Red Book itself, I was reading a story about the anchorite. The anchorites were basically hermits that went out into the desert trying to have a direct experience with God. And very often they would have a psychogenically projected experience, and they were always worried about that experience being Satan. And so there's this footnote on page 258 of the Reader's Edition where he says, the devil is naturally the voice of the anchorite's own unconscious that rises up against the forcible suppression of his nature, where the anchorite is trying to suppress that. And the problem is then we lose connection with the shadow side, which we need. So,
yep, I always thought of the anchorite in the medieval sense of being a lay person, usually women, who volunteered to have themselves kind of walled up inside of the wall of the church and would spend their lives basically imprisoned doing constant prayer and meditation and just being kept alive by the kindness of passersby. I'm not familiar with the definition of of like a desert father. Is that an older?
Yeah, that's an older interpretation that Dr. Jung brings up in this section called the anchorite. Let me see if I can find the original thing.
I'll just mention Julian of Norwich, who was an anchorite, and the little room was built with one wall was the church wall, and then 3 other walls were outside the church. And there was a little window that people could come to for spiritual direction and prayer. That's all I remember about that. But her life story is very interesting. And Mirabai Starr, Starr, has written a wonderful translation of Julian of Norwich, in case anyone would be interested.
That sounds very like the descriptions I've heard elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a really common arrangement.
Okay, I'll read the footnote from the Anchorite, which is chapter 4 of Liber Secundus of the Red Book. Okay, so I'm just reading one footnote, footnote 44. And this footnote was written on December 30th, 1913 in Black Book 3. Jung noted, quote, "All kinds of things lead me far away from my scientific endeavor, which I thought I had subscribed to so firmly. I wanted to serve humanity through it, and now, my soul, you lead me to these new things. Yes, it is the in-between world, the pathless, the manifold, dazzling. I forgot that I had reached a new world which had been alien to me previously. I see neither way nor path. What I believed about the soul was to become true here, namely, that she knows her own way better, and that no intentions can prescribe her a better one. I feel that a large chunk of science has been broken off. I suppose it must be like this, for the sake of the soul and her life. I find the thought that this must occur only for me agonizing, and that perhaps no one will gain insight from my work. But my soul demands this achievement. I should be able to do this just for myself without hope, for the sake of God. This is truly a hard way. But what else did those anchorites of the first century of Christianity do? And were they the worst or least capable of those living at the end? Hardly, since they came to the most relentless conclusions with regard to the psychological necessity of their time. They left wife, child, wealth, glory, and science and turned toward the desert for God's sake. So be it. So that's what he said about anchorites.
Just a question here. In the Orthodox religions, like in the Eastern European, where they used to take the icon, the people who drew the icons, and they literally buried them, so that all that they had was like their hands, which was a lot what we're talking about tonight. They had their hands to create the artwork, and they had no distractions. They were like underground, and they were covered in dirt, and all they did was draw these icons, and they were just given merely enough food to keep them alive so that they could continue to draw these icons, which is, of course, like our medieval monks and the Irish with the Book of Kells, which is how the monks did as well. Is this the same sort of thing?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
It's trying to push out a symbol of God, right?
By not having any other.
By having no distractions.
No distractions. So they're actually, I'm correct in that they were totally buried alive, except basically their face and their hands. Correct?
Right. And so there's some interesting commentary here on the chat. Nicholas Chan says to info, in Jungian terms, the encounter with the self is indistinguishable from the experience of God. I concur. Anna Bobana says, Thank you for responses. Interesting to know that Jung wasn't intentionally affiliated with Gnosticism. You know, he accepted Gnosticism, I would say, mainly because of the experience, the issue of experience, and the fact that in psychology you can know nothing if you haven't experienced it. You know, you can tell the child the stove is hot, but until they experience it, they're not going to get it. And
well,
so,
he kind of went back to the pre-Christian era to explore that era, and then he went into the alchemy. So he studied all sorts of different.
Right. So Nicholas goes on. I think it wrote through him. 7 Sermons was only included in the German edition of MDR for largely the same kind of reasons the Red Book was not released. You know, they were afraid that people wouldn't understand it. He himself said before he died, who would understand it? People wanted him to publish it. And he said, who would understand it? So they put it away for 48 years. And when they pulled it out, and Sonu Shamdasani obviously was personally very deeply touched by it, and he spent 13 years putting it in publishable order. But when it finally published, oh my God, I mean, it just turned everything up on its head, including all of Jungian analysis, because most Jungian analysts had no clue about the Red Book. And then Anna Bobana says, I always got the impression, but he responded that while Jung often gets accused of being one, but wasn't a Gnostic. Well, Jung was his own man, okay? And so he was not about trying to found a religion or any such thing. He was trying to understand how the psyche works. That's what he was trying to do. He was a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and you know, the whole thing is basically we all think in these images. That's how you think. You know, just think about it. Okay, tomorrow when you go to work, think about everything that you think about. It's an image of something, including groups of words, or you know, let's take Beethoven's Fifth. Okay, if you know enough about Beethoven's Fifth, you know that it goes ba 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 at some point, and you probably can hum a few more bars of the music. So that's an image of that particular symphony. Or you can think in terms of the Beatles singing Yellow Submarine. Well, until I mentioned Yellow Submarine, none of you were thinking of it. But once I mention it, then you all have an image of the Beatles singing the Yellow Submarine, right? It comes to your mind if I mention it. I mean, I can say any word and it will do that. If I say the word red ball, you didn't know I was going to say red ball. That image wasn't in your mind, but here's a red ball. And my red ball is very soft and squishy, so I use it for squeezing during long sessions like this. But but none of you knew that until I just told you that. But now, if somebody says Skip's red ball, you're going to have an image of that, an image of this incident just now when I showed my red ball. And so all of our thinking comes from imagery, and
well, that happened to me today, actually. And if I share the story, I'm almost afraid you'd disconnect me from the group. But I told my wife, and she said, well, coming from you, I believe it. And let me just say that I listened to a song by a very well-known and notorious rock and roll band, and I was like bowled over when I thought about the words that they were singing. But you had all grown if I said who it was, I'm saying. So I don't think I'll go any further. I'll leave you in suspense and sometime in the future go into more detail.
Okay.
But what I'd just like to say is that these messages will come from who knows where, like the strangest sources. And I don't believe you're not going to always find it in church. I don't know, personally, I think I found more outside of church than in church, although
Right.
I will say learning about the Bible is very important. And
Okay.
and if you go to church, you do learn that. Anyway.
Surely. I mean, what you have to know about all religions, and this includes Eastern religions, is that they provide skeletons for you to get up to enlightenment or to knowing God, or however you want to describe it. But you have to get over that yourself. I mean, you have to, so, you can go to church and sing the hymns and listen to the messages for years and nothing ever happens. But a lot of people do have experiences like Nancy's, where she knows that God is with her every day, all the time. And so do I. But I don't see God. My God image is not a guy that's hanging out there in space, trying to pull my strings. That's not the case at all. He's not a kindly Geppetto at all. God is something else. We can talk about that another time. But
I think I'll just put it out there, since I already started the story. But the song is titled "Everyone Has a Reason to Live." And the video is very powerful, and it portrays the classic infidelity on the part of a man. But when I listened to the song, "Everyone Has a Reason to Live," it was like, holy cow, that strikes me in that we as men, we are to love all women, and I would say, and that is a calling in the Bible. It's explicit.
Mm-hmm.
And this song, "Everyone Has a Reason to Live," made me think of that as men, we are obligated, when we enter into a marriage with a woman, to do our darndest to love them unconditionally. And as you've said, Skip, so many times we do fail at that because we're not properly trained psychologically, right?
Right.
Now, here's the kicker. The rock group is KISS, KISS.
I have no
And
doubt.
they've been around since I was a kid in 1970. I think in 73 they started out. And they're actually right now on a farewell tour. And if you stop to think about, the psychological, archetypal messages that they've embodied, that's got to be part of their longevity.
Sure.
There's a psychological impact by that group. Now, it may not be your cup of tea, but
well, BTS isn't anybody's cup of tea either, or a lot of people's cup of tea, but they have 80 million plus fans, and they're going to be remembered way more than KISS probably because of that, because they've had social networking available to them. And so every time they put out a new song, it's immediately number one on charts around the world, not only in the United States, but globally. It's just incredible what happens.
Yeah, if you look at the lyrics that Miles is talking about, the KISS lyrics, it's all, I would say, archetypal type of relationships and so forth that really grabs you the same way with VTS, only VTS is doing it a lot better in terms of combining all forms of art forms together into a coherent whole. So they're using dance, music, lyrics, performance arts, theater. They've combined all this into one package, and it's a holistic idea behind it, and it's really stunning. So,
all right. So one of the important things that we have to get to here is the idea of self-healing, and Dr. Jung talked frequently about the transcendent function, which is a function of getting from your unconscious something into your conscious mind so that you can integrate it. And he said he believed that your hands instinctually would find a way, even if you couldn't think of it intellectually by your intellect. And he said, often it is necessary to clarify a vague content by giving it visible form. This can be done by drawing, painting, or modeling. Often the hands know how to solve a riddle, which the intellect has wrestled in vain. By shaping it, one goes on dreaming, and the dream in greater detail in the waking state. And the initially incomprehensible isolated event is integrated into the sphere of the total personality, even though it remains at first unconscious to the subject. And then she says, we see in this passage that the impulse of making is not art for art's sake, but for what is already in nature, the inclination towards self-healing. And so comments there.
I'm a big follower of meditation and healing myself. Louise Hay has some, has spoke on that for many, many decades now. And I was really glad to see that in this essay, because to me, it is a joining of the unconscious and the conscious, which is what Dr. Carter is talking about in this essay as relates to Jung, but having the two come together. And when the two come together, it has to start on a conscious level. You have to consciously begin the process, but then the best way to do some of these meditation things, like by Louise Hay, where she actually guides you through them, is to actually let yourself go to sleep and let it go into your subconscious, and you wake up with a eureka morning or with a eureka moment. And I do that a lot because my brain just happens to work that way, is where in order for me to come to a conclusion or come to a synchronicity, it's got to be done on a subconscious level. I think subconsciously, not consciously. So when I wake up with lyrics in my head that I've written, poems in my head, or I've woken up with something that is going to bring me to the healer within, is what I'm trying to get to.
Right.
And it's really well done in this essay.
Well, also, I had to use my writing skill this week around a dream, which you can find on the YouTube channel. But the part of that dream that is significant is that I'm taking a bus to a train station, and as I'm getting off the bus, a very young girl starts to fall down in the stairwell behind me on the bus, and then the bus door is closed, but there's a space underneath the glass of this bus door, and she almost rolls out underneath this glass, but then she doesn't, and there's a Mormon family on the bus that comes and pulls her out of the well and pulls her back. But I'm meanwhile getting off the bus. And so when I was thinking about this dream, I had a new granddaughter born 4 days ago, and she's 4.5 weeks early. So she's in the NICU, and you know, they're keeping her there until she develops a little bit more. She has no particular serious problem, but anyway, obviously my unconscious was working with that situation and worried about her. And so the associations I had from that dream were that she was almost falling out of life because she was coming off the bus of life with me, but she was being pulled back by this good family because I was associating from personal experience before that Mormon families are good families, and I think my daughter's family is a good family. So symbolically, the Mormon family represented my daughter's family, bringing this little girl back into the bus, into life. And so then the bus leaves, and there I am standing in front of the train station, and that's the end of the dream. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Now, what the heck does that mean? Because now the bus of life has left me off at this train station. What does that mean for me? Okay, it means the baby is saved, but here I am in front of this train station, and it was very weird. And so I decided to do an active imagination from that point. And mind you, in active imagination, you don't force it. You just let whatever comes come. And so what came was sort of a re-encouragement that it wasn't time for me to die yet.
I could feel that as soon as you said that. There's another reason here, because no, Skip, it's not your time. I just know those things. So
yeah, but
we're stuck with you a while.
You're stuck with me for a while, but I'm saying, what is my unconscious telling me? I wanted to know what my unconscious was telling me, and so anyway, you'll have to go listen to what happened after that.
Did you put a number on that, or is it a session number?
Well, you have to look at the YouTube channel. It's Skip's Dream in the Bus Station or something.
Okay, yeah, because I do want to go look at that, because I got all this intuitive feelings as you were talking about it, and I immediately knew where you were going when you said you got off the bus.
Right, and I had seen the bus.
You're not going anywhere, so.
Yeah, I was seeing the bus's life, so here I am off the bus, and the bus is pulling out, and I'm going, oh my God. Does
that mean I'm dying, right?
Right, but then I did an active imagination that encouraged me that I wasn't dying, but it revealed some other things, which I ended up having to put on the political psychology channel. But anyway, I came back into life after the active imagination, which was very encouraging and very useful for me from that point of view. So I couldn't get a grasp of it intellectually. At the end of that dream, I couldn't just work out, okay, what's going to happen now when the bus of life pulls away from me and the baby's okay, but I'm here on the ground and the bus is left. What's going to happen to me? What's my unconscious saying to me about that? I had to do the active imagination so that I would know what that would be.
Well, the baby came early. You said 4 weeks early. The baby she still has a grasp to the netherworld, so to speak, where you are in the real world. She is still being held in the incubator, just for precaution, but she still has one little tiny hand reaching back because she's still 4 weeks too young, and she will catch up. So, I'll do this really quickly because you spurred this in me. I had a nightmare last night, and where I woke up in intensive care from the surgery that I'm having Thursday, and which should not happen at all, but I woke up in intensive care. And
this morning, you were in
I
intensive
woke
care.
up this morning. I'm having surgery Thursday.
Right.
And I woke up this morning and it was like I was really there. I mean, I say I woke up, I couldn't have been totally awake because I was in intensive care.
Oh, I see. You
Okay.
didn't physically go to
No.
You had a dream about it.
I had a dream about it.
Mhm.
And so I woke up and I was all upset, as you were upset. Did I just get off the bus of life? Am I dying? I was upset too. Am I really going to wake up in intensive care? It wasn't 20 minutes later, the phone rings. It's the doctor's office, and the CAT scan that I had done, which was recommended the place to go by my insurance company, is not the CAT scan the doctor needs. So now we're jumping through hoops to get me another CAT scan so I can have my surgery on Thursday. So I was getting this message that something was going to go terribly wrong and fall all apart, which it did. So I'm glad it was just that, and not that I really am going to wake up in intensive care with severe problems. So sometimes you got to, I had a girlfriend who used to call it this. Sometimes you have to go around your elbow to get to your thumb to find out what your precognition means, especially when you know, as you did, and as I did this morning, this is precognitive. Because I know when a dream is precognitive. And so that, as you can imagine, I was as scared as you were this morning, Skip. It's like, this is
now mind you, I don't accept your interpretation of my dream. Okay, but you know, I mean,
well, you said
it was an interpretation, okay, but I don't. But my interpretation was that the bus represented life, and the little girl almost fell out of life and was pulled back by the good family, okay, into life.
Whereas you could get off the bus knowing that you were in life.
Well, no, that's your interpretation. My interpretation was that the bus represented life, and getting off the bus was leaving life. Okay, because if the little girl had fallen out of the bus down the stairs, she would have died, right?
But you got off the bus.
But my psyche was telling me it was going to be okay in terms of my granddaughter's survival, right? But in telling me that, she's surviving by getting back on the bus, and I'm off the bus, and the bus is pulling away. And so that's the way I interpreted it.
No, I interpret it that way too. But that's why you went on further with the active imagination.
Because I wanted to know what was going to happen.
Yeah, because you're not dying.
Right. Okay, so anyway, moving on here.
Moving on.
Could I just say one quick thing about dreams? Jean Shinoda Bolin has done a course on the goddesses in every woman. And a lady asked her, what does an Athena woman do when she gets old and she can't, work for a corporation and lead a corporation or something like that? And I was surprised to hear Jean say, it will be compensated in the dreams. She'll have a lot of pleasure through her dreams doing some compensation. And I had never thought of our dreams in that way, helping us when we desire something so much and can't have it, that our dreams would bring us those joys that we're missing.
Yeah.
Nancy, are you aware that Bolin, that she has now written a fourth book?
She's got way more than that.
Well, no, but in that series, it's the goddess in every woman, the god in every man. And then the third one, but there is another one out now just for mature women, the goddess in mature women. And it has just come out. So I wanted to let Nancy know about that, because I think that's exactly what you're talking about in your dreams. As we mature, and you and I are mature women, we have to look at where the goddess, mature goddess, goes from here. So I have the book. I'm reading the first one, and I can't wait to get to the one that just came out, because it's more of, you know, the age group that I'm in. But I wanted to recommend that to you and to all of you, really, because women do change significantly after a certain point,
Right.
whether we want to or not.
Okay, so one more thing I wanted to mention on this page is I have a note in my margin notes here that moderns live vicariously and therefore don't have meaning. And what I mean by that is, to the extent that we live our psychic life by watching television or going to the movies or going to a sporting event or watching a sporting event on television, that's all vicarious living. And in earlier days, certainly up right on through the middle of the 20th century at least, everybody was really in it. Okay, everybody was in life. People were drawing water. They were doing all kinds of things that today we have done for us by convenience. You now go to the grocery store. You don't have to churn butter, right? You just pick up a tub of butter at the grocery store. But even as late as the mid 20th century, people were having to do that. I mean, my father, who was born in 1922, remembers not having a power refrigerator in his house, having an ice box and having to go and pull ice back. And his grandfather survived in our family farm that I had discussed earlier by keeping 13 cows. He had 13 cows, and every day would hand milk these cows and then take the fresh milk down into town and sell it in the hotels. And he would do this either on some sort of cart or on a sleigh, literally on a sleigh. And by a sleigh I mean a sledge, not a something that's nice and that upper class people would have, pulled by 4 horses. He had a horse and it pulled the sledge down the road. And that was my great grandfather, who died in 1941. But that's the way he lived his whole life. And so what we have in a transition to us moderns, we have a problem in that we are living life vicariously. We're not actually getting into the nitty-gritty of what it takes to support us. And I mean, we've had a few incidents around here where we lose power for 5 days or a week. And boy, you find out just how vulnerable you really are when you don't have power.
This goes back to Jung's situation in Bolligen without power and water. And I'm wondering what the effect is going to be even in today's world, where you don't even have to go to the store. You can get your stuff on Amazon and have it delivered.
Yeah.
Or you can use your device to turn on all the lights in your house, and you don't have to get up to change the channel on the TV. It's almost like we are becoming so dissociated from our bodies that we are losing out on the simplest things in carrying on a life.
Right.
I think there's a point where we need to realize that there's a degradation of psychic life that is connected to our refusal to engage physical life. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do worry about that.
Well, and it's mainly a problem for Americans, Western Europeans, and maybe Japanese, maybe Australians, but most other people in the world are still back in the carrying the water days. Okay, I mean, most people in the world, there's 2 billion in the people in the world that don't even have any electric light in their house. And even today, 2 billion. And so if some catastrophe happens, they'll probably be all right. But you know, if a comet hits and knocks out our power grid, the rest of us are going to be in trouble. Maybe not you rugged guys up in Montana and Alberta, but certainly around this very soft Annapolis, Maryland, there would be serious problems. And we have a lot of guys with guns, but they don't really know what they're really supposed to be used for.
There was and I can't remember the name of the author, and I feel embarrassed as an author and writer, publisher, and to not know it. But in the early 50s, I believe, there was a book on science fiction, which almost all science fiction really isn't science fiction at all. It just hasn't come into being yet. But where in talking to Tim, I guess it is, it talked about how people were going to become just barricaded in their homes and everything was going to be brought to them and they were going to become all cerebral and the body literally was going to basically decay away to the point where they couldn't move anymore. And everything would be done on, you just have to think of what you wanted and it would appear through your, you know, like a direct link to Amazon or something. And I don't know if you're familiar with this sci-fi book or not, but it's exactly what you're saying, Tim, is that we're getting, now, for me right now, who's crippled and can't walk at all, hey, Amazon and Whole Foods bringing stuff to my door is great, but believe me, I can't wait to get back out there and pick out my own milk and fruit and stuff. But it really was predicted through science fiction back in the 50s or late 40s. This was going to happen. Is this kind of where you were heading, Tim?
Well, it was covered in Elysium, a movie called Elysium with Matt Damon, where the rich people went off world and went into a satellite. They didn't want to even live on the Earth and they just left everybody behind with not much, and they still had all the good things. But question about it, but the whole movie indicated that wasn't really a viable solution either. Tim, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just connecting back to this old, I guess it's a Buddhist idea of chop wood and carry water. There's this engagement with the direct physical stuff of life that I think is really pivotal to hanging on to a healthy psychology.
Right.
And I think, Deborah, what you were mentioning is...
Well, and I really feel it just when I walk outside the door. Okay, if I'm in the house for much of the day, and then I walk outside my door, I go, oh God, nature, thank goodness. You know, it's still here. And you know, the whole thing is we have to, well, I mean, I guess the point is about dissociation and how we're dissociated. And we have many fragmented ideas in our minds. And we need our psyche to pull us together. And the point of this essay is that you can do it through many different art forms and because you're doing the art form, whatever it is, it exercises this transcendent function and it allows you to communicate with your unconscious, which is very hard to do if you don't have a practice.
I'll jump in with a quick little anecdote talking about on building on what Tim said, and just getting close to the fundamentals. I used to live in the late 80s and early 90s in a small town called Revelstoke in British Columbia, mountain town. And the mayor at this town, he was also a medical doctor at the local hospital, plus being mayor. And on Saturdays, he would bring his home-baked bread to the little square, and it was farmer's market. But this man found baking bread meditative, I guess, therapeutic. And I was just talking to my family a minute ago about how, it was so wonderful thinking back to when my mother would bake bread and the house filled with the smell of baking bread. And then you waited with anticipation for it to come out of the oven, and then you put butter on it, and it's so good. But that even baking bread can be therapeutic, I'm thinking.
Right. Okay, just for a minute on the chats here. R has asked me if I would talk about synchronicity, and I would say that's not a topic for tonight. It's just too complicated. Jung wrote an entire book called Synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle, which I would urge you to look for, and you can find an electronic version of it in our Dropbox. And I think I have addressed synchronicity. There are over 1,000 videos on this YouTube channel. So if you put the word excuse me, put the word into the search, very likely you'll come up with some videos where we discussed it in the past. It's not that we won't do it in the future, but it basically means a meaningful coincidence. And I showed a lot of synchronicities in my talk called Finding the Living God. So if you put that phrase into the search, you'll find my piece called Finding the Living God, and the first half hour of that is all about synchronicities. It's all synchronicities, in fact. So one of the things that she's talking about here is trauma, and how Dr. Jung had suffered childhood trauma because of his relationship with his mother and father, and especially he was mistrustful of the word love, and he never could figure that out. And he thought women were innately unreliable, partially when he was very young. His mother went to what then would have been called insane asylums for periods of time, and so he didn't have her around, and so he had these peculiar internal splits. And so, but by following his instinct to do various crafts and have his own imaginal life, he was able to pull himself through that dissociation. And actually, as we'll talk about shortly, the very last thing in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, like the last 5 pages of it, which is almost the last thing he wrote in his lifetime, is all about love. So it's interesting. And you can find that in the Dropbox as well. Okay, so if you've sent the email to me in the last, since we've been on here. That's why I haven't seen it. Otherwise, you might want to send it again, because I get about 200 emails a day, and sometimes I swim as fast as I can. As Kevin Costner said in the movie The Guardian, when asked who he decides to save, he was a rescue swimmer. He says, "I swim as hard as I can for as long as I can, and the sea takes the rest." And I'm starting to have that kind of a problem with keeping up with my activities with this group and the advanced group. So
Sounds like you need a secretary here.
yeah, that'd be very nice. Except we have to disabuse ourselves about the remuneration of YouTube, because I have nearly 8,000 followers now, and I make less than $50 a month from YouTube. So just so you know, it's unless you're going to do a song that's going to sell millions of copies, you're not going to get much income out of YouTube unless you figure out a way to get people to do other things. So, so it has to be a calling. That's what this is for me. All right. Other points? Anybody else have any? Okay.
I just wanted to show some of the little figures that I do in clay for dream work.
Oh, please. Yeah.
So like they're very simple. This is a 12-year-old girl, black girl in my dream, who was trafficked and ended up in a house of prostitution. And so in making her, then I could be present to that energy of that 12-year-old who was very innocent, didn't understand what was going on, and do active imagination and so forth. But I just keep some of this clay around it. It's self-hardening. You can get it at a craft store. And just it doesn't have to be great, but just something that your hands are making, you're feeling it as you're making it, you're being in contact with that dream image. And there is some healing that comes through that.
Right, and even that is active imagination. I mean, active imagination doesn't have to be this wooey woo thing you're doing in your deep psyche. That's the point, that all of these methods are methods of active imagination.
Right.
And
Well, and I think you're looking for a balance between your mind, your body, and your soul is kind of the Zen approach, and what they're talking about, carrying wood and getting water, or chopping wood and getting water.
yeah, there's a good point here that Jung makes a note. You know, people who want to stick with the logos and the rational approach, they always want cause and effect. They want to know what caused this, what caused that. And Dr. Jung makes this point: the causal standpoint merely inquires how this psyche has become what it is as we see it today. The constructive standpoint, that is, by using craft, asks how out of the present psyche a bridge can be built into the future, into one's own future. And so you can think of it that way, that it's a bridge into the future. And I've made a note here. He says, true engagement with almost any art form can help bring forward parts of the self not previously known to consciousness. If taken seriously, witnessed, and recognized, these new emergent aspects can be fostered and encouraged so that they begin to form solid ground or substantial containers for holding the vulnerable and wounded elements that can sometimes dominate the psyche. With repetition, these constructive experiences open the possibility for alternative self-perceptions, creating new networks in the brain. And I just mention one that I know of from my own father, because my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a philanderer. He was a traveling salesman and was often with other women. And at the time that my first marriage broke up, my father revealed to me for the first time, and this is when I'm in my 40s, that when he was 17, he confronted his father, who was in the bathtub naked, with a knife, and said that if he didn't stop doing that and making my grandmother upset, my father would kill him. My father told my grandfather he would kill him, but he didn't tell me that, you know, when he was much younger. And I was born when he was 24. So I was born 7 years after that. And so 5 years after that, I remember my father was a passable painter. And I specifically remember a painting that he did, which was of Emmett Kelly. And you may remember Emmett Kelly was a clown in the Ringling Brothers Circus, but he was a very sad clown. He had a frown. And I specifically remember my father painting that picture of Emmett Kelly, which was quite credible. And that's the last thing I ever remember him painting. But obviously he was trying to get something out of the trauma from his time with his father and mother. You know, and I was a 5-year-old kid, so I didn't have any idea what was going on, and I really didn't understand why Emmett Kelly was so sad. But now I know, and so it's a way that my dad was dealing with that, and so anyway.
I'll just say that sort of think about all the philandering us guys in particular do. And the philandering is all this trying to, as you describe it, slice and dice. And there's so much of this esoteric conversation going on all these channels like Rebel Wisdom, Paul Vanderklay, John Vervaeke. And, you know, I have to be careful because I greatly appreciate what they're doing. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking, as I elaborated or I mentioned earlier, that how often does it come up in the conversation, men love womankind? You know, like, what are you doing here? You know, you're not biblical. All these people, these pastors and ministers, and trying to say, well, it's orthodoxy or it's Pentecostalism or it's, you know, is it John Vervaeke or is it Paul Vanderklay? And, you know, at the end, after all this, what does that accomplish? Well, you know, as Jung said,
dogma does not help you. Yeah, Edinger said it clearly, right? That Mother Nature is imperious, meaning that Mother Nature doesn't care two hoots about civilization, because Mother Nature was developed long before civilization. And Mother Nature wants you to do two things: survive until you reproduce. Survive until you reproduce. That's it. And so every human being on the planet is the result of millions of ancestors going back to single-celled organisms that have all done those two things successfully. They've survived and they reproduced. If there had been a break in the chain, they wouldn't be here. So we all are the children of those that survived and reproduced. And so,
well, I think
but then having said that, we are here to, we're here to bring the opposites together. We're not just here to reproduce. We're here to, find the truth of what Jesus was talking about. And it's not necessarily going to be found.
I'm sorry, Miles. I'm not here for that. I'm sorry.
Well, no,
Okay,
I'm not saying Jesus is the only way. I'm saying I'm convinced the First Nations have taught me the truth of the Bible. I'll tell that to everybody here, and I'm emphatic about it. I'm not proselytizing any Christian particular belief. In fact, you've heard me say I'm not a Christian yet.
Right.
Okay. I think I agree with you, Miles. There is another thing. It's not, for human beings, it's not just survival and reproduction. There is something else that has to do with expanding the human possibility. And I don't know what the language is for that. I've heard it in biology that it's our duty to cooperate. The third thing is to cooperate. And I think I agree with you, Miles, that's not enough for me. It's got to be not only cooperation, but it's got to be some aspect of love, that we are duty bound by our creation to participate in love. And
I absolutely agree with that. And to participate in Eros, which is life, right?
Right. And then I also wanted to comment on what you said about violence to women. And one thing that keeps coming back to me is, you're absolutely right, but also when we do violence to women, we are doing violence to our own souls. And we have to realize that this violence goes in two directions.
Surely, and that's what has to be educated better. I mean, we have to understand that, as Dr. Jung said, there are lots of barbarians walking out there on the streets of Europe and America still, and people who haven't developed beyond where humanity was 10,000 years ago in terms of their psyche. And so we need to have a bridge to the future. We need to see, the value of that little girl that's in the NICU right now, right? And how we have to make a commitment to that. Men have to. And that's a civilizing function, isn't it? And so, I always come back to Von Ellison's song in Jesus Christ Superstar, which Lloyd Webber wrote, which the line is, I don't know how to love him. He's a man. He's just a man, and I've had so many men before in very many ways. He's just one more. Well, I'm just a man too. Okay. But I could use guidance. We all can use guidance, but it's not guidance which is logos-oriented, rules-based guidance. It has to be guidance that's meaningful and comes from life and from, what our role is. I mean, in most species, the male has sex with the female and probably doesn't even know that the babies are his by the time they're born, right? And we humans are quite a bit different from that. And so, people who are just going around switching partners regularly are losing out on what is unique to human beings, to our civilization and to ourselves individually, I think. I don't know how to say that, but, you know, we have to realize, number one, that we are biological men, but number two, as you say, there is something beyond that. But I don't believe that it can be resolved by dogma. Okay, I don't believe that. And you know,
Well, I think that what Miles was talking about with the Verakis and all the logos of preachers going around is that the dogma, you know, it's not getting anywhere. And I think Jung would call these people world confusers. You know,
yeah, I think you're right about that.
he said that to a lady in one of the conferences he was at, and he said, "You're a world confuser." You know, I said, "You're right there." You know?
Right. Nicholas says, perhaps somewhere in the middle, Jung said something like God phenomenizing itself through the human. Well, he certainly said that, and he certainly said that in the last paragraph of Answer to Job. And the point is to understand that there are, I guess in Jungian psychology, if we're going to come clean, we have to come clean with this letter that's in this book, The New God Image. And the letter is in a letter that he wrote to Reverend Cox, 1957. And he said, although all this sounds as if it were a theological speculation, it is in reality modern man's perplexity expressed in symbolic terms. It is the problem I so often had to deal with in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients. It can be expressed in a more scientific psychological language. For instance, instead of using the term God, you say unconscious. Instead of Christ, self. Instead of incarnation, integration of the unconscious. Instead of salvation or redemption, individuation. Instead of crucifixion or sacrifice on the cross, realization of the four functions or of wholeness. I think it is no disadvantage to religious tradition if we can see how far it coincides with psychological experience. On the contrary, it seems to me a most welcome aid in understanding religious traditions. And so he did say that, but the God image in the individual is the God that's forcing you to do its bidding, okay, the self. But then there's another God which Dr. Jung, based on this, would interpret as the collective unconscious. And it doesn't mean the collective unconscious of North Americans. It means the collective unconscious of all human beings on a global basis. And so if you think of it in that way, then we don't have a kindly Geppetto that's there pulling your strings and making sure you're going to get across the goal line in the big football game. It's something far greater that you need to be able to know how to interact with. And it's extremely powerful, and you know, it hasn't resolved itself. We don't know where the spirit is taking us. I don't know.
Well, but you can feel that if the spirit is within you and taking you somewhere, you may not know where, but you know,
Right.
say I'm on for the ride here, you know. So
right. So we need education that tells us when we're little boys, when we're little boys, that, what's the value of having a wife and a family? And, and not letting you think that you can just go have a trial marriage and drop a couple of kids in your 5-year trial marriage and then go on and do something else and then do something else. It doesn't work that way. And by the same token, little girls have to be educated appropriately too. Because in my personal case, I felt that I had been driven out of my first marriage. I mean, literally pushed out of it by my wife after 17 years. I mean, it wasn't that I was wanting to leave, but I was being forced out, and for unconscious reasons. She didn't know that that's what she was doing, really. She was just trying to make me into her vision of what I should be instead of trying to understand what I was too. That was the issue. And so we have to educate our families better along these lines. So maybe we can get it by craftsmanship and so on. And, let's see.
Just a quick thing here. I think
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
whether it's male or female, I think we need to have respect for ourselves and for the spirit of whatever God or whatever higher power you believe in, whatever name you use. You need to have respect in yourself and in your actions and where you're going with your life. You also need to have that respect come from your higher power. So I think it's a combination then of that brings it together into the conscious and unconscious. It brings it from the psyche and from the God experience of God filling you. But respect for yourself and respect from your higher power.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too trite, but.
Well, I think that we're sold a metaphor of God that maybe is a lot of people have bounced off of it in the 20th century. And so we have to talk about it in a different way, okay, and maybe a more scientific way. And this is what, this is why Edinger insisted at the end of his life that Jung was a scientist, basically was a scientist. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier, that the reality of psychology is that the way we think is in images. That's how we think. It's not by statistics. So psychologists that use statistics and say, well, if you're doing this, there's a 93% chance you're like this. That doesn't really say anything. Okay. I mean, this week I had the experience of having a dear friend of mine, whose name is Meltem Arikan, tell me that she has been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. She's 52 years old. She's written 6 or 8 novels. She's written numerous plays. I've participated in one of them that caused her to be exiled from Turkey and had to run for her life to the UK along with 3 other people. But nowhere, never did I ever think that she was autistic. And if you go to the archetypeinaction.com website and look in the upper left corner, you'll see that I've highlighted many of her articles, and I've given her a place of honor on my website for the last decade. Okay, that's been there for the last decade. And so it never occurred to me that she might have been autistic in any sense of the word. Never occurred to me. And so it just tells me that you know, there's just so much that we don't know and understand about one another. And yet this is a very successful woman. She's been married twice. Her second husband died. Her first husband, I don't know, skied out, but she's got a son that's in university. And so she's had a normal life as near as I could tell up until this point. And so now, let me put it in the web chat. She has a website. She's now started a blog on her, let's see, on her .blogspot.com. Okay, meltamaricon.blogspot.com. So she's started this site where she's going to talk about having this diagnosis, which helps her understand herself and her own life, she says. And it's very interesting. I don't know if that worked as a link there, but you might want to go to her. I'll put it onto the webinar as well, because
well, whenever someone is labeled with something like that, and a lot of doctors that we hold in high esteem are wrong. You have to own that label. And if you don't own that label, you fight that label, which has been my experience in life for the past 30 years.
Which is apparently what they're
doing. Don't own it. Don't accept it. Fight it. Heal yourself beyond it.
Well, what they're advising now is that you do own it, and you tell people that you own it.
Well, then she evidently agrees that it's a correct diagnosis. You
yes.
don't think it's a correct diagnosis.
No, I don't know enough about it. I mean, I'm not a mental health professional. I don't know anything about the autism spectrum, other than... That's
one of the things I've studied and great, but I studied it with kids and with children and teenagers.
But, I mean, so here she is, 52 years old. She's never had this diagnosis up till now.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
but she's saying she understands herself now because of it. So if it brings her comfort, then that's good.
Yeah, I would say so. And so anyway, this blog spot that I've given you the link to, she's now going to express her experience, and what it brought to my mind is maybe Dr. Jung was autistic. It could be.
That is a possibility. I did think that in some of his writings, but there's also, he talked about neuroses and phobias too. And I think a lot of because there are things that you have at birth in brain chemistry, but then there's also environmental conditions like that on a psychological level. His seemed to be a lot in the environmental arena.
Right.
But he withdrew into himself, thus fostering it. The little thing with the little hiding the little mannequin and the stone and the little yellow pencil case.
Yeah, he was self-healing, basically, is what he was doing.
Exactly.
And so then it made me ask, well, maybe I'm autistic. Okay.
See?
And I mean,
maybe I'm autistic.
Yeah, maybe we are.
My brain is different, that I know.
Okay, so, this doesn't have to be a big, it doesn't have to be a big hernia pack. Let's just say that doing things in a crafty way, whether it's, painting, sculpture, whatever, dance, whatever you choose, does help you get in contact with your unconscious. And in my case, one thing I know is I make an omelet every morning for my wife. It's a creative activity. It's a very simple activity. It takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes to do. We enjoy it. We eat well. But I know that by creating that omelet, I'm linking up first thing in the morning with my unconscious psyche. And I see it as a creative activity. So my point to our listeners, of which we have quite a few here, is find some creative activity to do, because it's going to make your life better, and it's going to connect you up better with your unconscious, so that you see where you're going without going there blindfolded, without getting dragged there.
And I think one of the things as well is that we can contemplate or reflect on as we do these crafty things is that, we're at a point in civilization where, as Joanna Macy says, we need to create and foster active hope. She calls it active hope. And business as usual, that's another term of hers, business as usual, and you hear that a lot. Business as usual economics has to end. Business as usual religion has to end. Business as usual Christianity has to end. And
we have a lot of cookie cutter pastors out there, a lot.
And I'd say business as usual masculinity or business as usual men must change too. To me, that's sort of what is the numinous, as Craig Nelson defines, is the one who beckons, and we've got a beautiful planet, but business as usual is killing it, right? We're doing so many stupid things. The list is very long.
Right.
Miles, last week you really impressed me in that you are searching for a creative outlet. You talked about the teacups and you're searching for a creative outlet, not knowing exactly where you want to go, but just knowing that you want to go there, does show you have the fire within you. And I also want to quickly remark to Nancy, I absolutely love what you do with the little figurines. It is something you can hold, it's something you can relate to, and it's something that makes it real to you. And it makes it real. It made it real to all of us tonight as well. And a beautiful, beautiful endeavor.
I'd like to read a sentence from this article that we're studying tonight that I think is a good summary of this. And this is on page 239. And it's in the second paragraph towards the bottom, the last sentence of that paragraph. Through play and giving the emotion visible shape in expressive modalities, a product is created which is influenced by the conscious and the unconscious, embodying the striving of the unconscious for the light and the striving of the conscious for substance.
Right.
So in making those little figures, it's like what was in the unconscious in the dream now has form in the outer world. So that aspect of the unconscious is being recognized. There's an integration that is happening. And consciousness has something to touch, to feel, and in the creative act was cooperating with the unconscious. Together, that came forth.
Right, that's very important. I think the metaphor of, any plant, let's say rhizome, Dr. Jung talked about the rhizome very often, about how, a plant knows how to become a plant. Every creature knows how to become that specific creature. I mean, that's really what, for them, individuation is about. For human beings, individuation is a little bit different. I mean, if you're an oak tree, once you start growing, you're going to be in that spot for the rest of your life. And so you meet all the characteristics of oak tree, but every oak tree is different, right? But there's something unconscious in the oak tree that causes it to become a full-grown oak tree. Well, human beings are like that. There's something in our unconscious that makes us grow up, become fully functional adults, hopefully for the most part. But then we're not planted there, okay? And we're not like other animals. We actually have a civilization in which we have to interact. And so that's when what we have to do is integrate those instinctual forces that we have within us into our lives and make it work, not only for us individually, but for the society in which we live, and to support the planet that we live on. Obviously, that's critical. I mean, we can go for destroying the planet all we want, but if we destroy the planet, we're done too. And so we really have to think about that. Let's see. Okay, any other comments tonight? Because we're up against 20 after 10, so. Hello, anybody else? Nothing else to say? Okay, so are we agreed that we're going to move on next week to Memories, Dreams, Reflections? Is that what we want to do?
How are we going to do that, Skip, if you're not going to be reading it? How should we prepare?
Well, I would suggest we do it by chapter or something.
That sounds good.
Right? Because then it takes us sort of chronologically through Dr. Jung's life, and we can talk about these things. So there's 12 key chapters, and you know, they vary in length, but I think it's good that we talk about each one of them individually as he has done. So what I would suggest, and others can pipe up here, but I would suggest we do the first years. Well, let's do chapters 1 and 2. And the prologue and introduction also for next week. That's first years and school years. Does that sound
How many
right?
chapters are there in the book?
12. And a retrospect.
Oh, maybe. Well, I guess 2 chapters a week, we would be done in 6 weeks.
Well, no, we're not going to do 2 chapters a week, but because they get more complicated. I mean, the first years and the school years, okay, that's, you know, young people, and we've all been kids and so on. So we can talk about that one week, but then the following week, the student years probably does require a week by itself. Psychiatric activity certainly requires a week by itself, and each one of them after that really does involve a week's worth of conversation, because these are major areas of his life. And then there are 5 appendices too. There's letters from Freud to Jung, letters to Emma Jung, letter to Emma Jung from North Africa, and Richard Wilhelm, and Septem Sermones ad Mortuis, which is part of the Red Book.
So are you going to read the 7 sermons too?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have read the 7 sermons onto the YouTube channel.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Right. And so you could hear them there. I'm not going to read any of this book because, as I say, there's an audible.com excellent recording that Robert Bethune did. So I'm not going to substitute for his recording, but you can all buy it for a limited amount of money if you want to hear it. And the book itself is not expensive. So, and also there's an electronic version of it in the Dropbox, but you know, I find I can't read on my computer. I can't read a book on my computer because I sit at my computer 8 hours a day as it is. I'm not going to sit here and read a book here too. So at least most of the time I'm not. But any other?
Yeah, I have a condition called raster eyes today, which means you look at a computer, you know, raster is the lines that go across the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So you go around all day and you've got these lines in front of you, and it's because, you know, so it's called raster eyes. So, because I've been looking at the computer very closely, doing some editing, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's what I do 8 hours a day, guys. The editor here. So
Yeah, well,
it's tiring.
So you have raster eyes too. So
And I had the special blue glasses here that to save my eyes because I do it all because a lot of
Meanwhile, we have Brendan has joined us, but I don't know how much of Brendan has heard of our conversation tonight. I'm sorry, Brendan.
No, that's all right. How are you?
Good. Did you just join, Brendan? Or?
No, I joined at 9:20. I joined an hour ago. I've been listening interestingly, and I looked up that quote and have been reading it while you've been talking online about rather than salvation, realize the 4 holes with a W. And it's been fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. That comes from the appendix to the New God Image by Edward Edinger, but it's a letter that Dr. Jung wrote late in his life to the Reverend David Cox, I believe.
Yeah.
And by the way, all the letters, just so everyone knows about this book, because it's an important one, The New God Image. This book by Dr. Edinger is based on 14 letters that Dr. Jung wrote in the last few years of his life, primarily. And they're letters that were largely hidden by the Jungian analyst community, okay? Because my interpretation is they wanted to avoid getting into controversy with the theologians and with the philosophers, I suppose. And so they kept their mouths shut and didn't let anybody know that they were really serving as shamans after a fashion. And so they hid these letters, and only 7 of the 14 letters even appear in the two volumes of Jung's letters that have been published. But there are 7 of them there if you know what to look for. And 7 of them, actually, I'm not and 7 of them were in volume 18 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, which is, I think it's called The Symbolic Life. But, you know, of course, if you're just getting into Carl Jung, when are you going to read volume 18, right? So, and then when are you going to understand what the heck that's all about, right? And so it's taken me over 30 years to get to the point where I understood what this was about. But Edinger finally pulled it together for me. So that in 2017, when I was laid up with my new knee, I read this book and I said, holy cow, no wonder, no wonder things are as they are. But anyway, those letters are profound, and I have read them by permission into the YouTube channel, and there is a playlist called The New God Image, so you can listen to me read all 14 of the letters if you want to, even if you don't have the book. But the one to David Cox, I sort of emphasize, and I put those equivalencies as the thumbnail on that particular letter, so you can find that letter if you want to. And that's a quite long letter. It's a 10-page letter, and what I read of it was about a third of a page. So there's a lot in there, but that third of a page is really the essence of everything Dr. Jung was talking about in religion. Seems to me, anyway. That's my position, and I'm sticking to it. Any other comments?
I'm going to try and be with you guys next week. I should be coming home from the hospital Sunday. I'm going to give it a shot. Because I really would like to hear what's said about the beginning.
Wow, you're lucky. When I had my knee replaced, they threw me out the next day.
Oh, well, I have a few complications, but gosh, my last knee replacement was 20 years ago, and I was there 9 days. So believe me, 3-4 days sounds great to me.
Okay, well, have a nice rest.
Thank you.
Best of luck too.
Yeah, best of luck to it. We'll be
so
thinking of you on Thursday.
Yeah,
I'll pray for you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That means so much. I can't wait to be walking again. Believe me.
Tim, you were speaking.
Oh, just saying good luck. Gosh.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So peace, everyone. Anybody else? Last chance to say something. Okay. I'm going to terminate now, and I hope we've responded to the chats. Anybody that's on the YouTube chat that isn't part of the webinar can certainly write to me separately. So anyway, we'll be talking. See you next week.
Good night,
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.